The question is that the bill be now read a second time. Shadow Minister James Wilde.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And work on reform of the Crown Estate was developed by the previous government. I'm pleased that we're debating the bill today, and I thank my noble friends in the other place for the scrutiny they've already provided of it. And we support the objective to increase the Crown Estate's ability to compete and to invest, so it maintains and enhances the value of the estate and the income derived from it. And assets managed by the Crown Estate are not the property of the government, nor are they part of the sovereign's private estate. Since George III, the assets are held in right of the Crown, which encompasses the interests of the sovereign and the government. And that's why it's important that there is appropriate scrutiny of the Crown Estate and its assets, which total £15.5 billion, a rural portfolio of 185,000 acres, managing roughly 7,400 miles of coastline, with one of the largest portfolios of property in the West End. And of course, it returns all of its profits to the Treasury. And last year, there was a record profit of £1.1 billion, which was up over £600 million, largely due to fees from the Round 4. And over the last decade, it's generated £4.1 billion for the nation's finances. But there is the potential to do more. And in the business case prepared under the last government, the Crown Estate estimated that changes that are in this bill would enable it to generate £100 million a year in additional revenues by 2030. So it's right, therefore, that we help to modernise the Crown Estate as it aims to create lasting prosperity for the nation. And whilst we support the aims of the bill, there are obviously areas where further scrutiny is needed, including a limit on the level of borrowing, governance, the relationship with Great British Energy, and safeguards in relation to the disposal of assets. And I will come to each in turn. As we've heard, the kernel of the bill is Clause 1, which confers a broader power to borrow to the Crown Estate, subject to Treasury consent. And whilst I note the need for Treasury approval, it is a concern there's a lack of parliamentary oversight on borrowing levels. When pushed by Baroness Vere of Norbiton and other noble lords, the government stated that a limit on borrowing is better placed outside of legislation and instead in the Memorandum of Understanding between the Crown Estate and the Treasury. And that MOU sets out the Crown Estate can borrow up to 25% of the worth of its total assets. But an MOU is very easily altered. Public borrowing levels should be transparent. If Parliament's being asked to remove restrictions on borrowing, then why shouldn't there be a cap in legislation with the ability to swiftly amend it through statutory instrument if necessary to protect against unconstrained borrowing and the concerns my honourable friend raised? I give way to my
for my honourable friend giving way. Can I agree with him? The Crown Estate and Treasury Framework Agreement was, I think, ineffective, or at least could have been strengthened. Memorandum of Understanding in a similar vein, so I support him. Can I just ask him to comment? I have concerns about this bill. The general principle I agree with, but I think there are potentially fiscal hazard and reputational hazard for the Crown, not just the Crown Estate, potentially ahead if some of these investments go south. And of course, there's a link to the sovereign grant. At the moment, there is a link between the Crown Estate and the sovereign grant. I think it's around 12%. Not all the income to the sovereign grant is derived from the Crown Estate. But if the investments were to go wrong, who would be liable? And if we have a weak MOU with no statutory oversight, it's more likely to go wrong.
Well, I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend for making those points, and I think he's absolutely right to highlight the potential risk there is. There's no one-way bet in life. There's no guarantee that the Crown Estate will successfully invest in projects that go well, and that's a point I'll come on to a bit later in my speech in terms of the energy side of things. So it's perfectly reasonable, as we proposed in the other place, to have in legislation that 25% cap, which could be amended. And I'm sure this is an issue we'll come on to consider further during the committee stage. And the bill also alters the governance of the Crown Estate and provides for the number of commissioners to be increased to 12. And given the extension of the powers and the decrease in parliamentary oversight, pre-appointment scrutiny is of great importance. And I thank my noble friend Baroness Vere of Norbiton for seeking and securing assurances from the government that the chairman of the Crown Estate Commissioners could be added to the Cabinet Office pre-appointment scrutiny list, and just before Christmas, Rick Lewis was announced as the preferred candidate for that role, and I'm pleased this appointment will now be considered by the Treasury Select Committee. But perhaps the Minister who's winding up can confirm whether other commissioners will be subject to any pre-appointment scrutiny. And turning to salaries, which I don't believe the Chief Secretary referred to, under Clause 2, Parliament will no longer be responsible for approving them through the estimates. Instead, they will be paid out of the income of the Crown Estate. And currently, the framework document sets out that remuneration of the Chief Executive should be in line with or below that of an appropriate benchmark group approved by the Treasury, and that a clear majority of the Chief Executive's total reward should be conditional upon performance. And we support rewarding success, but with the loss of parliamentary oversight, I'd be grateful if the Minister can confirm whether there are proposed to be any changes to the remuneration framework, and specifically for the Chief Executive, and will he give an undertaking to report to the House on any such change in the future? And turning to Great British Energy, on the day the bill was introduced, the Government announced a partnership between the Crown Estate and GB Energy, which it claimed will unleash billions of pounds of investment in clean power. Indeed, the press release went on to say it will lead to up to 20 to 30 gigawatts of new offshore wind developments, reaching seabed leasing stage by 2030. But there is a lack of transparency over how this partnership will work, what difference it will make, and the impact on the estate's primary duties. And given the supposed significance, I would have expected to see a partnership agreement by now, as without one, we do not know what has been agreed. Can the Minister confirm if there is a partnership agreement yet, and will he commit to publishing it before the committee stage? Has the Crown Estate agreed to invest a certain amount with GB Energy? What process is there to ensure the Crown Estate continues to deliver on its duty to maintain and enhance the value of the estate? And how will the Crown Estate decide between projects GB Energy backs and other projects which may have a higher rate of return? And the GB Energy founding statement, Madam Deputy Speaker, adds to the confusion, adding that the Crown Estate will establish a new division, Great British Energy, the Crown Estate. This raises several questions. Will there be new staff required, or will it simply be a restructuring of the existing group? The statement also says it will sit under both GB Energy and the Crown Estate, with strategy and investment agreed by GB Energy. So will decisions be made jointly on investments, or will the Crown Estate retain its independence? Given the Government voted down our amendments to the GB Energy Bill to introduce more accountability, it simply fuels some suspicion that the partnership's been created for political rather than economic reasons. And the reporting requirements that were secured and added to the bill in Clause 4, which the Chief Secretary referred to, will at least help bring some transparency to this, but there's a need for a lot more. And under the previous government, the UK became the first economy to more than halve emissions whilst growing the economy and became a leader in offshore wind. However, we must acknowledge that renewables are not cheap in all scenarios, and there's clearly a risk that the government will push up the cost of wind by rushing ahead to meet their political target and increase prices for consumers as a result. A far cry from the £300 cut in energy bills that Labour promised during the general election. And as we scrutinise this bill, Parliament has an important role to play to ensure the government does not seek to use the Crown Estate to try and deliver the Energy Secretary's damaging policies and undermine returns to the taxpayer. As I set out earlier, the Crown Estate owns some vital assets, so it's very surprising that there are so few safeguards to prevent commissioners from selling off such important assets. In the business case for these changes, the Crown Estate was planning £1.4 billion of disposals to fund investments, representing nearly 10% of its portfolio. When I asked the Crown Estate representatives what that covered, they said they're unable to disclose plans for disposals because it is commercially sensitive information. Again, this raises concerns about transparency. And in response to questions in the other place, the government said they were working with legal experts to establish the extent to which the Crown Estate can currently sell the seabed, for example. And at report stage, Lord Livermore confirmed that if the government established further legislation required to restrict the ability of the Crown Estate to sell the seabed, they would bring forward an amendment. So I'd be grateful if the Minister, in winding up, can update the House on the progress of these discussions and the need for such an amendment. Because the disposal of assets should be properly scrutinised, and the government rejected attempts in the other place to bring more scrutiny here, and said that a statutory limit on disposals would undermine the flexibility the Crown Estate needed to operate commercially. But given the assets are held for the benefit of the nation, we should ensure some form of transparency if they're to be disposed of, whether that's reporting to Parliament or indeed seeking HMT approval for disposals of specific assets or those over a set value. Finally, salmon, Madam Deputy Speaker. Clause 5 would require the Commissioners to assess the environmental impact and animal welfare standards of salmon farms on the Crown Estate. And if a salmon farm is causing damage or animal welfare issues, then a licence would have to be refused. And I commend my noble friend Lord Forsyth of Drumlene for his tireless work on this matter and highlighting that salmon farming can cause detrimental impacts in the event of escapes in terms of disease and breeding and other issues. And given wild Atlantic salmon are now on the International Union for Conservation of Nature Red List, these are perfectly reasonable obligations which he talked about might influence how the Crown Estate Scotland is to operate. So the amendment was sponsored by Lord Forsyth, but also by members of the Green Party and the Labour Party itself. So it's disappointing to hear the Chief Secretary intention to reverse that clause, and we look forward to that debate in the committee stage. So to conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm grateful.
I'm grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for giving way. Salmon farming is enormously important in my community, as indeed in many others around the Highlands and Islands. They will not be affected by this, apparently, although we might hear confirmation from that at a later stage. But is it the Honourable Gentleman's position that this is the only way of regulating salmon farmers? Is he not aware that there is a massive amount of regulation that goes through salmon farming already? Does he really think that the Crown Estate Commissioners are the people to be doing this job?
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman. He will have read, as I have, the Hansard debates in the other place where this issue was covered at some great length. So I defer to the points that were made by Lord Forsyth there. There is obviously regulation in place, but this simply adds a little bit to the bill to raise awareness of this issue. So the government have said that they supported the objective of the amendment when it was discussed in the other House, but didn't think it was necessary. They didn't think it was going to do any damage. So I suggest it remains part of the bill. But to conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Crown Estate Bill will help deliver the modernisation that is needed, but the purpose must be supporting the estate's duty to maintain and enhance its value and maximise return to taxpayers, rather than becoming an extension of GB Energy's chequebook. And we will be pursuing the concerns I've raised about checks on borrowing, governance, the relationship with GB Energy, and the safeguards in response to the disposal of assets to ensure that that remains the case.